Thank you for that introduction. Good to be here in Mumbai. So we're going to talk a little bit differently today because there's a lot of discussion around AI needing data. Of course, we all understand that. The discussion today is why data needs AI. Turn the tables around. So we're going to talk about building data products using generative AI and AI agents to accelerate that process. Before we get into that, I want to address the most common question that I've had since I arrived in India last Sunday. Is this my first time to India? Everybody asks me that question. I'm happy to say that actually this is the 30th anniversary of my first visit to India, back when Bangalore was a very small place. And I've been coming multiple times every year except during COVID, building tech organizations in Hyderabad and Pune and other places. So this is not my first time in India. These are some of my early visits. That's the Lion Fort in Pune, the Red Fort in Delhi, Ellora Ajanta. This is my Bangalore family, the son of my good friend in Bangalore. And so I've been coming to India for a long time. That's my first wedding in India. And of course, the Taj Mahal, Rajasthan near Jaisalmer. Many people don't know that the largest dome in the world, unsupported dome. Where's the largest unsupported dome? It's the Vatican. Where is the second largest dome in the world? It's Bijapur, right? And that's what you see over here. The Gartner IT Expo this year is going to be in Kochi. If you go there, you can see the grave of Vasco da Gama down there on the bottom left. And this is some hiking I do with a good friend of mine in the northeast near Darjeeling. And there's some tea plantations. So I tell my Indian friends, I've been more to India than you have. Because they always have to go back home every time to see their family in the same cities over and over again. I come every year and go new places in India. And so it's an amazing country. This is my annual haircut in Calcutta. And I spend a lot of time here. There's the border that's now closed between Pakistan and India. And here is where I spend Christmas every year, which is in Amritsar at the Golden Temple. I know most people, tourists, go to the Taj Mahal. I go to the Golden Temple. So not my first time in India. Love this place. So let's now get into the real content, the real meat of the discussion. All companies in the 21st century claiming, we are an AI company. Let me tell you, you are not an AI company unless you're first a data company. There is no AI without data. And so we need to build that data foundation in order to fuel the AI. And the industry, we got to do a big problem, and I'm going to blame the economist for some of this. They coined this term, data as an asset. Terrible term. In fact, they went even one step further and said, data is the oil of the 21st century. Oil is a dirty resource, right? You use it, you pollute, use once. Data, the more you use it, the cleaner it gets, the better it gets, right? So you don't want to be data as an asset thinking, you want to be data as a product thinking. But data as a product is not just putting bytes on disk drives. We did that 10, 15 years ago. People shoveling data onto Hadoop distributed file system, IT people declaring wild success, having big parties, another petabyte onto an object store somewhere. And the business is like, we just spent gazillions of dollars and we got no value. This is terrible. That's data as an asset thinking. What do you do with an asset? You shovel bytes onto a disk drive, you put it in a warehouse, you put castle guards in front of it, they're called DBAs, and the answer is no. Data as a product thinking is, we're going to consume that data to generate intelligence. And if you're going to consume data and generate intelligence, you have to package that data, for consumption. I have to be able to find that data. It has to be discoverable. There has to be business metadata that describes what data do I have in business terms. A business person does not want technology discussions. They want business discussions. I should be able to search with natural language to find out where is the best place to get the data for, understanding clients and this geography and this line of business, et cetera, et cetera. Discoverability. That's really through the business metadata. But if you build a business metadata infrastructure that is an island and doesn't connect to the technical metadata that tells you how to get the data to make it addressable, because in the end, we have to go get the data. And the business person doesn't care if your data is on-prem or in the cloud. They don't care if it's in Redshift or Teradata or BigQuery. They don't care. Don't care. Just give me access to the data. But of course, we in the room, most of you, since you're in the tech track, I assume that you've got your hands a little bit dirty, right? We need to go get the data. We need to get it from file systems and databases and so on. For that data to be useful, it has to be trustful. What is the key to trust? Transparency. Where did the data come from? What is the lineage of the data? What are all the transformations that we did to the data between the source system and landing it into my AI scoring algorithm? What are the data quality metrics? This is, again, all about metadata. If we look at the semantics of accessing the data, I've seen some people say, we are going to create a single version of the truth for the enterprise. Before you finish that sentence, you have already failed. For a complex enterprise, there is no single version of truth. I guarantee you your CFO counts revenue differently than your head of sales. I guarantee you the mortgage people, think about this. How many customers do you have? How simple a question can I ask? I will get 5 answers if I ask 4 people. Mortgage people count households, credit card people count individuals, all kinds of rules about who is a customer and who's not a customer and so on. It's not because finance is right and marketing is wrong, but of course finance is always right. But they have different use cases. So there are different versions of truth depending on what is my knowledge worker community. What is the context in which I want to get this question answered? Now, it does not mean we should have one copy of the data for each one of these knowledge worker communities. We want one single source of truth, which we can use to reconcile the multiple versions of truth. Mortgage and credit card count customers differently because they have different rules for doing so, but it all reconciles when you look at single source of truth. Now, that single source of truth is not going to be in a big monolithic data warehouse. That never works for a complex organization. You got to have multiple data products, decentralized in terms of their deployment teams throughout the enterprise, and they need to be interoperable and so on, and that means that we need to have some global standards. In India, the DPDP regulations are starting to look very hard and squeeze on the protection of the data, protection of the privacy of the individual. And so we need to understand what data is PII, personally identifiable information, what data is PSI, and how to apply masking rules depending on who's accessing the data and so on, right? This is all metadata. Everything I described is metadata. And I know metadata is not sexy. The business says, wait a minute. I don't even understand this concept of metadata, right? And the IT person, well, metadata is data about data. That makes my head hurt. I just paid for all the data, and now you want me to pay for data about the data? And it's interesting, because of the importance of metadata to provide context for your AI decision-making, metadata is now escalating in importance. So if you look at last year's data and analytics conference in London for Gartner, one of the key taglines is, if you want to be AI-driven, you need to be metadata-driven, right? Metadata is not passive documentation after the fact, right? And this year they sort of doubled down on this theme. So it's got to be active metadata, not passive. So let's talk about how we're going to use generative AI to revolutionize the creation and consumption of data products using agentic AI. So if you look at a traditional data pipeline, it probably looks something like this in most of your organizations. We've got a bunch of source systems, call centers, and core banking and finance and so on, and we're going to extract that data out, some form of change data capture, some form of pub sub on a message bus or streaming infrastructure. We're going to capture the data in raw form in a data lake. You might call it the bronze layer if you're using a medallion architecture. Right? In the data lake, that raw data doesn't really have a data model. It's not really organized anything more than what you got from the source system. It is not fit for consumption. That's what the big mistake was that people made, let's say 10 years ago, shoveling data into Hadoop. That was raw material. It was a good start, but it wasn't consumable by a knowledge worker. So in order to get from raw data into data product which is consumable, we need to have a manufacturing process. We need to curate and transform the data. We're doing data integration, we're doing surrogate key generation, metadata, master data management, et cetera, et cetera. And historically, that is a very manual process. Humans spend about 80% of the time in building a data warehouse, a data product, in that manufacturing process. And it's ugly. And so this is ripe for opportunity using agentic AI. We can use, if you give the right fuel to the AI agents, and we'll talk about what that is specifically, then you can automate that process. And then we build the data warehouse. I don't mean a big monolithic data warehouse. I mean a collection of data products which are interoperable. Let's call that a logical data warehouse. These are your foundation data products. The knowledge worker is not going to be able to consume the foundation data products directly. They need these semantic layers that we discussed earlier. And so derived products is actually aligned to each one of those knowledge worker communities. And a finance person might want a cube that they can slice and dice and use dimensional analytics and drill down and so on. I will tell you, I don't know a single data scientist in the world that wants a cube to work with. They want a big, fat, wide record with 10,000 features in it, everything you can describe about a client. Now, these different structures depend on the knowledge worker community and what they're doing with the data. Now, if you talk to a DBA about building a wide record of 10,000 elements, they're going to say you're out of your mind. But that's what the data scientist wants. So this semantic layer that represents the derived data products does not have to be physical, it can be virtual. So use combination of physicalization and virtualization to optimize for cost, performance, extensibility, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So this is what we're doing in our data pipelines. And there'll be many of these data pipelines aligned to each one of the data products in your enterprise. So the promise here is using agentic AI to automate the mapping from the raw data that's in the data lake into the data in the data warehouse, the data products. Right? Now, you can't do that without strong context. So that raw data, we need the technical metadata describes how to access the data. We need to do semantic discovery that essentially builds the knowledge graph so that you understand all the relationships within the files and across files. And that should be all automated using the AI machine learning techniques that are now possible. Now, again, the techniques are actually not that new, but the economics of using the techniques is very different today than what it was 10 years ago. Most of the AI algorithms have existed for a long time. It's the economics that have changed and the ability to scale. So you can automate that mapping. And if you're in financial services, it's very important that you have data quality controls and data quality metrics that are defined on each of those elements. And those data quality controls can also be generated using agentic AI. And I'm going to generate those rules based on my internal banking policy, my regulators, and so on. In the past, again, it was a very manual process. Now I can do it in an automated way. Even the metadata, which is a form of documentation, and everybody hates documentation, we can create the business metadata using agentic AI, using generative AI techniques. And so There's huge opportunity to increase efficiency here. Now, what is the critical success factor for your agentic AI to deliver on this promise? It's the metadata context. The technical metadata that understands the profiles for the raw data. This is relatively simple to create using deterministic algorithmic approaches to go scan and get all that technical metadata. And then we can use more sophisticated AI techniques to build the knowledge graphs to understand that data. In your internal documentation as well as external regulatory documentation is used to sort of drive the mappings, drive the data quality controls. It's the context for your generative AI agents. And then you have a target data model which you're mapping to, again, metadata context. Now in the future, we believe that we'll be able to completely generate the target data model as well. Not quite there yet, but that's the direction in which we're moving. And there's a lot of patents in this area, and it's proceeding quickly. Now we have the data products. We want to consume the data products. Now, before you consume a data products, you want to have a conversation with the metadata to figure out where is the right place to get your fit-for-purpose data. Where is the most up-to-date data? Where is the highest quality data? Where is the data about this particular subject area or business process domain? Conversation with metadata in natural language. Language of your choice. Could be English, could be one of the many languages that exist on this continent. Once you understand what data you want and you've explored the marketplace, then you use natural language to interface directly with the data. The knowledge worker does not care about the database technology. The knowledge worker does not care about the cloud technology. Completely don't care. Insulate me from all of that using the AI agent to do the work behind the scenes, underneath the covers. Again, the critical success factor is the metadata context. The critical success factor is the business metadata describing the data product and then connecting that to the technical metadata that tells me where to get it and what access methods to use to optimize access to that data. And you've got the semantic mapping from your knowledge worker view of the data into the foundation data products and all the transparency so that I trust that data. So this is great stuff. This is revolutionizing the creation and consumption of data products. But you need to future-proof your solution. Underneath a lot of what I've talked about is large language model to sort of drive these conversations with data and metadata and the mapping from source to target and so on. So if you're going to future-proof, you do a very strong due diligence to figure out which language model should you use. No matter what you choose, even if it's the best language model at a point in time, in 6 to 12 months, you will be wrong. Because the technology is moving very, very quickly. So you need to build your metadata context independent of the particular language model. In fact, it is unlikely that a single language model is going to meet all of your requirements. The reality is you will have multiple language models coexisting. And in fact, they might not all be large language models. In some cases, a small language model is going to be more cost effective for things where maybe you don't need the same level of accuracy or generality. Assume that your language model is going to change and that you're going to coexist multiple languages models. Assume that whatever cloud you're on today, you're going to pivot and you're going to have multiple clouds. I know most of the banks, they do a big due diligence, they make a big commitment, big announcement with some big hyperscaler. We're going with this cloud. Trust me, within 2 to 3 years, there'll be another announcement with a different cloud. And you won't get rid of the first one, you'll coexist them. So that interoperability is important, design for portability. So at Initio, the approach we've taken, building the language model studio, is you can plug in the language model of your choice, and all of the metadata that you build, including the RAG vectors to drive the accuracy of models, it's all independent of a particular language model. Portability, interoperability, very important. So all the infrastructure that you use to drive retrieval augmented generation and sort of optimizing your prompt engineering and so on, these things need to be independent of the particular language model that you're using in order for long-term success. So let's use a very small example. you're a bank, you have a data quality control that all loans above $1 million, which are securitized, should have the collateral evaluated within the last 60 days. Pretty typical kind of thing. In the past, someone would write code to enforce that data quality control. Right? So first of all, it's a dangerous thing to say in this audience, but code is evil. Code is tech debt. And so I see a lot of people measuring their success with generative AI as how many lines of code did I generate in the last month? And management is ticking boxes. Oh, yes, it's good, it's good. And they don't understand that the more lines of code you have, the more tech debt you have. More code is bad. Right? The hard part is not code. The hard part is robust specifications that a business subject matter expert understands and that your regulator understands. So we could take this English language description, we could generate code. That would be a fail. We can do it. That's a fail. What I want is a robust specification in a formal language using your business terms extracted from your business metadata, and I'll use the AI agent to generate that. And then once I have that, I can compile this into highly optimized code. Now notice the difference in terminology. It's very purposeful. When I generate a specification, when you use a large language model, it is non-deterministic. By the way, if you use 3 programmers, it's also non-deterministic because they will do it in 3 different ways. Okay? It's not a bad thing, you just have to recognize it for what it is. Okay? So I generate this formal specification, and then my business expert, who if you generate straight to code, they have no way to understand what that code is doing. So maybe a programmer understands, but the programmer doesn't actually understand the business requirements. The auditor certainly doesn't understand. The regulator doesn't understand. That's a miss. So you generate the formal specification, you review it, yes, I agree or I don't agree, you tweak it, and then you compile. Compilation into code is highly deterministic. And I could change the underlying database. So in this example, some of the data is an Iceberg on OTF, on Azure, and then we got an Oracle database is on a different cloud and so on. And if I change the Oracle database to a Snowflake database, nothing here changed. All we do is compile to optimize for a different target. That's very important. So when you deploy, you might deploy initially on one cloud or on-prem and move it to another cloud, another database, and so on. The hard work that you did is completely preserved. This is very important from a future-proofing point of view. So the fastest path to data products is leveraging agentic AI. Leveraging the language models, and I use that in plural because there will be multiple language models that you're probably going to use at least over time, both for creating the data products as well as for consuming the data products. Now, in order to make this work, we can talk about the sexy AI fabric. Yes, of course, you'll hear a lot about AI today. But that knowledge fabric is very important. So, in the past, we talked a lot about prompt engineering. Now the discussion is about context engineering. When you hear context engineering, think metadata. That's what's going on behind the scenes. And then you separate the logical definition of your formal specifications from the deployment, which is where the compute fabric takes, because of course you have to be able to implement everything and make it real, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very, very small example. I'm going to go through it very quickly. One of the keys to success is leveraging the ecosystem. No one solution is going to do all the work for you. Okay? So Model Context Protocol allows you to interoperate across multiple AI agents. So any reasonable deployment of any agent is going to allow that agent to interoperate with other agents. And maybe they're a client, maybe they're a server. But for example, for this very large American bank, they are using, let's call it a co-pilot technology from a small startup company. The technology is called Devon. And their goal is to improve the productivity of their software engineers by leaps and bounds. Of course, everybody's making these promises and so on. The vendors will promise this, the reality's down here, but you've got to get on board and you've got to start moving. So Devin can be used to interoperate. Devin is the client, Initio is the server with the agentic AI to create new data quality controls, to make modifications, to change the implementation. We might have, for example, a precision on a timestamp, which is microseconds, and we need to move to nanoseconds because of high-frequency training, et cetera, et cetera. And that data type is flowed throughout the data flow of your pipelines. Now, a human chasing all that stuff down is terrible. But if you have the metadata context, we can automate that whole process. And when I say automate, that includes automating, for example, opening the JIRAs, saying what we're going to do, making the changes to the data structures, et cetera, and the algorithms, and then closing the JIRAs, all completely automated. Right? This is a big deal from a software productivity point of view. So when we talk about the interoperability, using MCP integration is very important, and you'll have Docker and Jira and SharePoint, whatever it is you use, any reasonable agentic implementation should be supporting this industry standard model context protocol. So my call to action to you is first, embrace data as a product. Stop this data as an asset thinking. Bytes on disk drives does not create value. Creates cost, but not value. Consumable data to make your algorithms more intelligent. Embrace generative AI with metadata context to accelerate the construction of your data products and the consumption of your data products. And there's some very nice demos that you can go to in the room over there where you can see how Nostradamus, for example, is using some of these technologies. So I'd encourage you to go look at some of that. Embrace the ecosystem. Embrace model context protocol. Embrace AI agents that are working together, not working in isolation. Embrace interoperability across multiple cloud providers, across multiple language models, both large and small language models. So with that, I thank you very much for spending this first part of the tech track with me. We've got a great lineup of speakers, and I'll turn it over to our moderator for this. I'll be around all day, so just come up with me for any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brobst, for that wonderful and an insightful session. I request you to please wait back. And to felicitate Dr. Brobst, I take this opportunity and invite on the stage our Chief Digital Officer, L&T Finance, Mr. Ramesh Aithal, to please come on the stage and present memento to Dr. Brobst. Let's have a round of applause once again, ladies and gentlemen, for the wonderful session at RAISE 2025. Thank you so much.